Thank you so much for joining me here this morning. I'm humbled to speak after all of those awards. It occurs to me now, you don't need an inspirational, motivational speaker to change the world. You just need a few more hours in the day. So I'm not sure what I can do for you here, but Diana, thank you so much. Sharon, thank you so much for the opportunity to come here. I am the product of Kiwanis. I spent most of my developing and growing years receiving the services from folks like yourself in Western New York. So it's a privilege for me to come here today and be able to repay, if only a small portion of that debt, back to the Kiwanis organization. And I thought about what today is all about. Why are we here today? And today we have essentially three goals. We want to help grow our clubs. We want to help improve our own communities. We want to save 60,000 lives a year. As Bill said, we have a big, audacious goal. A mountain-sized goal to simply change the world. That's a pretty big deal. So my role here this morning is to talk to you a little bit about what it takes to climb a big mountain. Some of the challenges that we face as we do so and what we might learn on these journeys together. So what I thought we'd do is we're going to spend a few minutes, we're going to go climb Mount Kilimanjaro together. I will have you back in time for the sessions, I promise. So before we leave, though, I want to get a sense for how comfortable or how prepared you were. I know they didn't tell you in advance you were going to climb a mountain today, so if I can just by a show of hands, how many of you have climbed Mount Kilimanjaro already or a mountain like that? 1, 2, we have 3? All right. We need a few more, though. How many of you might have done something, like maybe you ran a marathon, or you did a really long hike, or a bike trip, or something along that line? How many of you? Show of hands. Okay. How many of you have faced a challenge in your life? The kind of challenge that forced you to dig deeper than you've ever dug before. To push yourself further than you've ever gone before. And to achieve a level of potential in yourself that you never thought possible. How many of you have faced that kind of a challenge? Okay. We're ready to climb Kilimanjaro. Now before we leave, I should warn you though, I'm not actually a mountaineer. I'm not a professional mountain climber. In fact, I'm an ordinary guy. Like many of you, I spend 8 to 10 hours a day sitting in a gray cubicle, typing on a computer and talking on a phone. On the weekend, I do a little bit of hiking, a little bit of backpacking, but for all intents and purposes, I'm not a mountaineer either. I did have a dream though. Many years ago, I dreamed about climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. In fact, for years I dreamed about climbing Kilimanjaro. I talked about it with friends, hoped to do it someday. A coworker once told me that for her, climbing Mount Kilimanjaro was a life-changing experience. That sounds pretty good. I'd like a life-changing experience. But for some reason, Kilimanjaro always just remained just a dream to me. Until one day, I met a woman. I was on my first date with Lisa in Laguna Beach, California. And after dinner, we were sitting in a coffee shop, cool breeze coming in off the Pacific Ocean. And we sat there sipping coffee, talking, as you do on your first date, about your hopes and dreams for the future. At one point, Lisa looks at me and she says, you know, I'd really like to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. Me too! We have so much in common! This is great! Now, what exactly had I just signed up to do now? If I can pause for a second, for those of you who are still dating, by the way, a little bit of advice. When you go out on a first date with someone, be very careful what you tell them you might want to do. Because if you're still together 6 months later, you might have to do that thing you told them you wanted to do. So what had I agreed to do? Mount Kilimanjaro is the highest point on the African continent. It is the largest freestanding mountain in the world. It is, in fact, 3 mountains that fuse together over hundreds of thousands of years. 19,340 feet above sea level. There's about 40% less oxygen on the top of Kilimanjaro than you and I are breathing right now. That's what I signed up to do to impress a woman. Now, years later, as I look back on that evening, and 3 months after that first date, we booked our trip. I had been dreaming about Kilimanjaro for years. And yet suddenly, I was willing to make that dream a reality. How many of you had that experience where you dream about something for a long time and then suddenly it just falls into place for you? And I always wondered what happened on that day that suddenly made that fall into place. And the answer that I've come back to is purpose. Purpose has become a strong topic in our conversation today. We have purpose-driven churches that help us connect with our faith. We have companies that are built to last and go from good to great. One of the defining characteristics for them is purpose. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. A key attribute is around purpose. And what I've found is many of us tend to have about 1 or 2 purposes active in our life at any point in time. And if I think back to that time, I probably had one purpose, which was to become professionally successful. I was working hard and trying to start my career. I probably had a second purpose, though. Probably a little more attached to that first date with Lisa. What do you think my purpose might have been as a young 30-year-old man? It's okay, I'm not complicated. My purpose at that point in life was basically to have a meaningful relationship with a woman. That was important to me at that point in my life. For years, I had talked with friends who were infinitely more qualified to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. And yet suddenly, now that this desire to climb Mount Kilimanjaro was directly connected to my purpose of creating a meaningful relationship with a woman, immediately action happened. And we were ready to go. 3 months later, trip's booked. 6 months later, we flew off to East Africa. We arrived in East Africa. First night we met Patience, the office manager. Wonderful woman, very aptly named. She gives us a warm hug and welcomes us to Tanzania. Next morning we meet Mohammed, our guide. Mohammed is the gentleman who's going to take us to 19,340 feet above sea level. When we meet Mohammed, he's been a guide now. He's been climbing Kilimanjaro for 12 years. He started out as a porter. His only job was to carry heavy objects up a hill. He worked his way up to waiter, to cook, to assistant guide, and so finally, he paid his own way to get trained by the Kilimanjaro National Park Service to become a certified guide on Mount Kilimanjaro. An amazing testament to what hard work and education can do. Mohammed takes us to the foot of Kilimanjaro, and we meet our porters. The porters are essentially the lifeblood of this mountain. Every day, these gentlemen are going to take big buckets like that, baskets, backpacks. They're going to fill them with gear, clothing, food. On average, it's going to weigh between 60 and 80 pounds. And they're going to put it on their heads. On their back, they're going to have a small day pack with their own clothes, and they're going to hike 10 miles uphill with us. Now, you all seem like wonderful folks, but I got to tell you, if I had to carry 60 to 80 pounds of your stuff up a hill all day, I don't think I would be in a very good mood. I've never met a group of people more eager to laugh, more anxious to smile, more warm and welcoming, more willing to share their culture with us. Every day as these porters pass us up that mountain carrying heavy loads, they greet us with a smile. They share the limited English that they have. They teach us a few Swahili words as we go. And we laugh and smile. Sue pointed out earlier, it's the little things. Here's a few ordinary people doing a very ordinary job of carrying heavy objects up a hill. But they do it with a smile and a laugh that has an extraordinary experience for us. You ready to spend a few days on a mountain with these gentlemen? All right, let's start climbing. The amazing thing about Kilimanjaro is we're actually going to hike through all 5 of the planet's ecosystems. Our first day, we're in the rainforest. There's a canopy overhead. Exotic birds are squawking at us from the branches. Fig, mango, fir trees all around us. roots and vines everywhere. We spend our first day hiking through the rainforest. The second day we break out of the rainforest, the canopy falls away, and now we're in the heather zone. We have trees and brush all around us. We're starting to get some views now of the mountains around us. We work our way through moorland where the trees fall away. Alpine meadow now, where just all we have is grass, until finally on the third day we made our way into alpine desert. No more grass, no more trees. It's just us. We spent 5 days making our way around Kilimanjaro, glaciers hanging over above us, until finally we make it to 15,000 feet. This is our base camp for our summit ascent. So congratulations, by the way. It took me about 5 days to get there. You guys did it in 15 minutes. There's a record in there somewhere. So we're now at 15,000 feet. We all have a bit of a headache. We're a little nauseous. We've lost our appetite because of the altitude. Are you ready to summit this mountain?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill. All right, so here's what we're going to do. At midnight, Mohammed's going to wake us up. We're going to hike 4 miles and 4,000 feet of elevation gain to the summit at 19,340 feet. Then we're going to hike 4 miles, 4,000 feet back down to our camp. We're going to pick up our stuff, hike another 10 miles down to 10,000 feet of elevation. You still ready? Maybe not. Midnight. Mohammed wakes us up. We get out of the tent, get out our flashlight, and we start hiking up the trail. And it is at this moment in particular that I realize there's a little secret that National Geographic never tells us about when they show us those movies or write those articles. Summiting a mountain is an incredibly, spectacularly, amazingly boring experience. It is horribly, terribly boring. For 5 days, we've had beautiful vistas across the African savanna and glaciers hanging over the mountain. It's midnight, friends. There's nothing to see. For 5 days, we've been learning Swahili from our local Tanzanian hosts. We've had other people from Canada, Denmark, Switzerland, and Germany to share stories with. There's 30% less oxygen now. There is no scintillating conversation. All we can see is a gray patch of dirt in front of us from our flashlight. All we can hear is the sound of our boots crunching on the trail. And all we can feel is our own lungs as we struggle to bring in enough air for hours. We started the night. Step, Chuck. Breathe. Step, Chuck. Breathe. After about an hour of this, Lisa says, I'm done. This isn't a life-changing experience. Lisa decides to turn back, and one of the assistant guides go with her. Mohammed and I continue. Right about now, you're realizing that Lisa's really the brains of the operation. Mohammed and I continue in the darkness. We get to 17,000 feet. I'm nauseous. I'm dizzy. I have a headache. I'm feeling kind of clumsy. I'm having trouble moving my body. We get to 17,500 feet. I'm nauseous. I'm dizzy. I have a headache. My feet feel like lead. My legs feel like jello. As we hike up the trail, things get a little funny, a little dizzy. And I realize that my legs are buckling, and I fall down on the trail. I don't understand what happens. Take a deep breath, shake it off, stand up. Keep going. We start making our way down the trail. 500 feet later, I feel dizzy again. My legs buckle, I fall down. I don't understand what's happening here. I shake it off, I stand up, take a deep breath, collect myself, go another 400 feet, fall down again. Mohammed helps me up this time. I try to ask Mohammed what's happening, except I can't quite get my mouth to articulate the words. I don't know what I said, but Mohammed said, okay. I don't know what that means. But we continue. Another 200-300 feet. I get dizzy. My legs buckle and I fall down. And we continue to do this until we get to about 18,000 feet of elevation on the mountain. Until, the only way I can describe it, my entire body finally just crumbles onto the trail. And I find myself lying on my back, my arms and legs just strewn about me. My whole body gets this warm, tingling sensation all over. This actually feels kind of good. I'm laying there on the ground, see the stars above, and off in the distance I can hear these footsteps coming and these voices. And I realize it's one of the group that was a family that was climbing with us. It's John, 63-year-old Canadian, and his 2 children that had joined him. Now, we can't look bad in front of the Canadians. So I take a deep breath, I sit up, John approaches. Dan, how are you? And before I realize it, I say, John, I'm thinking about going down. The words surprised me. I didn't even realize I had considered quitting, and yet the words came out of my mouth. John pats me on the shoulder. He says, Dan, you do what you need to do. And he keeps going. 63 years old. He's still going, and I'm laying on the ground. Every year, about 10 people die on Mount Kilimanjaro from altitude sickness, from pushing themselves too far when they should have turned back. And I lay there on the ground considering that. I spent years dreaming to get to the summit of Kilimanjaro. I'm about 1,000 feet of elevation gain away, about 1 to 2 hours away. I made the decision. I turned back. Mohammed and I took another 2 hours to get back down to our camp, 15,000 feet. I collapsed in the tent for about an hour. Lisa got me some soup, nursed me back to health. And then we hiked 10 miles down to the next camp at about 10,000 feet. When we get to 10,000 feet, the air now feels so thick. I feel like I could eat it. My whole body is saturated with oxygen. And suddenly, I feel fine. I'm not dizzy. I'm not nauseous. I don't have a headache. I'm not even that tired anymore. Now I start wondering, if I feel so good now, maybe I didn't push it hard enough on the mountain. Maybe I should have gone further. And all that new energy, all that new oxygen goes to one purpose and one purpose only: being really pissed off. And I'm sitting there in the tent and I'm stewing. You have to remember, by the way, Lisa and I are still dating at this time. And she leans over. She gives me a kiss on the cheek. She says, you know, we learn more from our failures than we do our successes. She's right, of course. I didn't want to hear that at that particular point in time. But she's absolutely right. Michael Eisner, no slouch to success, talks about failure being a sobering and enlightening experience. And I think about that a lot. Failure. A lot of times we hear failure is not an option. Sometimes failure may be the best option. We may have goals for our clubs, and we may be able to browbeat our membership into achieving those goals. But we may lose the bigger victory in doing so. Sometimes failure is the best option. But the most important part, though, is that we learn from those failures, that we face them openly rather than hide from them. Now, the good news is, I did impress the young lady enough for her to marry me. But I needed to learn from that failure. I needed to understand, why did I fail while so many others succeeded? And I kept researching this and looking into it. And I talked to a friend of mine who was a guide who taught people and takes people to climb Mount Shasta in California. And I asked him, why did I fail? Especially when so many other people, twice my age, succeeded. And he explained to me, in mountaineering, you have 3 buckets. There's your physiology. It's what you're born with. how your body responds to altitude. Some of you, your body responds very well to altitude. Some of you, your body doesn't. Mine doesn't. Here's the bad news. There's nothing we can do about that. The good news is, there's 2 more buckets. And in mountaineering, those buckets are your physical strength and your mental strength. And when I trained for that first climb, I was really focused on the physical strength bucket. I went to the gym during lunch, I watched TV while I was exercising, that sort of stuff, but I really wasn't filling that mental strength bucket. Tim and I started talking about it. We decided we were going to go back and climb Kilimanjaro together. And I started training with an express purpose for filling my physical and mental strength bucket. 3 months before we left for Kilimanjaro, I started training. Every morning before work, I got up 2 hours early and hiked 6.5 miles to work. I did that every day for the first month. The next month, I got up 2 hours early, and every morning I hiked 6.5 miles to work, and every evening I hiked 6.5 miles back. For the third month, every morning I hiked to work, every evening I hiked back, and every Saturday I would go out to the hills and hike 15 miles. And I still remember that first morning when my alarm went off. It was October. You know what October is like, right? It's dark in the morning, it's starting to get cold, it's rainy. That alarm went off and I was under that nice warm down comforter. Turned it off and I thought, oh, do I really have to do this? I mean, can't I just go to the gym during lunch? And I asked myself one simple question. Are you willing to give up the summit of Kilimanjaro for 1 extra hour of sleep? Are you willing to go back to Kilimanjaro and wonder, did you do everything you could to get to that summit? I wasn't willing to trade an hour for the summit, and so I got out of bed. I got dressed, and I went out and hiked into the dark morning. And I did that for about 2 weeks. I had that little conversation with myself every day in the morning the alarm went off. And so finally, after about 2 weeks, I stopped asking myself that question. That mental strength bucket was starting to fill. I don't need to ask myself every morning. I don't need to choose every morning to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. I already made the choice. Now I just have to go do it. And I stopped making the choice to do it and started getting out of bed without even thinking about it, getting dressed and hiking out into the darkness. And I knew by the time I got on that plane to fly to Tanzania again, I had done everything I could to fill my buckets and to mitigate my limitations. That's the lesson for us. How do we fill our buckets? We have the ability to write and live our own scripts. We all have limitations regardless of what our goal is. The question is, what can we do with them? We may not be able to grow our clubs. You may not be able to get rid of those challenging members in your clubs. But that doesn't mean we're helpless to achieve our goals. We just have to find other buckets to fill. So, you ready to go back to Tanzania?
Yeah.
We're back to Kilimanjaro. We get to the hotel. First person we see is Patience, the office manager. We haven't seen Patience in 3 years at this point. She comes over, gives me a warm hug and says, "Daniel, how are you? How's Lisa?" Next we see Lawrence. Lawrence helped us out with our equipment last time. Gives me a warm handshake like he's my uncle and says, "Daniel, how are you? How's Lisa?" We haven't seen these people in 3 years. And yet going back to Tanzania feels almost more like going home than going home does. Now the good thing is we're not showing up alone. Not only did Tim join us, the guide, but my best friend from college, Mike, decided to join us. His father overheard us talking about it, and he decided to join us. He's a 73-year-old retired IRS auditor. Here's another little tidbit of advice. If you fail miserably at doing something once and you decide to go back and try it again, don't bring someone twice your age. Because you know he's going to do it. In addition to Mike and his father, Tim brings some people. And what amazes me is the breadth and variety of the different training programs people went through. So Mike's father, he did a similar training program to mine, but he did it over 6 months. Much more gradual steps. On the far end of the spectrum, this gentleman, Paul, joins us. In preparation for Kilimanjaro, Paul ran 3 marathons, one every month prior to coming to Kilimanjaro. On the other end of the spectrum, we have 2 gentlemen joining us from California. One's a writer for Nickelodeon cartoons. The other one's a salesman for Yahoo. They're training, in their own words, 16-ounce girls. They're only training. They are so dedicated to their training that they arrived in Tanzania 5 days early to focus on training at the local hotel bar. And so we start climbing together. We spend 5 days. We start in the rainforest. We make our way through heather, moorland, alpine meadow, until we finally get to alpine desert. And after 5 days, we're now at 15,000 feet. It's midnight. Mohammed wakes us up, and we step out into the darkness. You ready to try again? We start hiking. 17,000 feet. I'm nauseous. I'm dizzy. I have a headache. Rob reminds us that we paid a lot of money to have this experience. By 17,500 feet, I'm nauseous. I'm dizzy. I have a headache. I'm feeling clumsy. I take out a candy bar to give myself a little bit of extra energy. I can't eat it. I'm so nauseous. By 18,000 feet, I'm nauseous. I'm dizzy. I have a headache. My legs feel like jello. My feet feel like lead. I try to sip my water, and now I'm so nauseous I can't even sip the water. We keep going. 18,500 feet, I'm stumbling up the trail, and suddenly there's a body next to us on the ground. It's Mike, my friend. He looks up at me and he says, I can't go any further. An assistant guide helps him up, and they start to hike down to back down to camp. Now at this point, the group had split a little bit, by the way. So Paul and some of the more marathon-y gung-ho people are in a group up ahead with Mohammed. In our little group, it's Mike, his father, Cartoon Boy, and myself. We have an assistant guide, and we have our other guide, Devin. Mike is now leaving with the assistant guide. So there's now 3 people, me, Cartoon Boy, and Mike's father, with 1 guide. And we pause for a minute, and we all look at each other. We're all having the same thought at the same time. 1 guide, 3 climbers. If one of us has to go down now, all 3 of us have to go down. The flip side of that is, if you want to quit, now's the time. And we sit there sizing each other up and looking at each other, and Rob, ever the diplomat, points at my friend's father and says, what if the old guy needs to go down? And as Rob's question starts to sink in a little bit, before I even consider his question, before I even process it, I feel that mental strength energy, that mental strength training go over and just block the question out. Just knock it right out of there. And I looked at Rob, and I turned around, and I started hiking up that mountain. I didn't need to choose to climb Kilimanjaro again. I had already made the choice. And so I continued. Finally, at sunrise, we make it to 19,000 feet. We're on the crater rim now. The good news is the sun is up. We can see a few things, which is very nice. We're at 19,000 feet. We have about 1.5 miles to go, about an hour of hiking around the crater rim now to the highest point at 19,340 feet. Basically an hour hike on flat ground. That's not hard. Not compared to what we've been through for the last 5 days, right? I breathe a sigh of relief thinking, I basically made it. And do a little dance. Take a few pictures, and we start to hike. Now, you will notice, by the way, the 73-year-old is in front of me. I snap this picture, and we start making our way around the crater rim to the highest point of Kilimanjaro. And about 30 minutes after I took this picture, I'm nauseous. I'm dizzy. I have a headache. My legs buckle. My body crumbles. And I fall onto the ground, unable to go a step further. I realized I hadn't had anything to drink in about 4 hours. Hydration is critical to summiting a mountain, so I take a sip of my water. Waiting. That's good. I hadn't had water in 4 hours, so I drink the rest of my water, at which point I vomit all over the top of the afternoon. And as I'm sitting there getting sick, I start to hear this drum beat, this kind of mantra, kind of forming in the back of my head. Leave it on the mountain. Leave it on the mountain. Not literally. Leave it on the mountain. I was not going to leave Kilimanjaro without giving everything I had to that mountain. I was not going to leave a bit of energy in the tank. Everything was going to be given to that mountain. And so I took a deep breath. I stood up. And I shuffled about 50 feet until I couldn't go any further. I stopped. I rested. Stood up. Took a deep breath. And went another 50 feet. Now by this point, the 73-year-old and several others are well ahead of me. Except there is one person I have caught up with. It's Paul. The guy who ran 3 marathons is doing the exact same thing I am. And little by little, inch by inch, breath by breath, we made our way around that crater rim. So finally, after 3 years, we made it to the top of Kilimanjaro. We did it in like 30 minutes. That's pretty good. Now, I would thank you. I would tell you it was my physiology that got me to 15,000 feet. It was my physical strength bucket that got me to 19,000 feet. But it was my mental strength that got me that last 300 feet of altitude and back down to camp. And so the key lesson for me there was, what's your mantra? Sam Walton talks about it as that story. Proves that we have no limit to what we can do if we're willing to put our minds to it. What is that thought, that idea, that image, that verse, that poem? What is that thing that you can cling to when things get most difficult, that gives you hope to continue? Is it the family that you might have served in your local communities? Is it a belief in the mission? Finding that is a critical component to achieving these big, audacious goals that you have before yourselves. And so I think back now to that time that my coworker told me that climbing Mount Kilimanjaro was a life-changing experience. She was right. For me, climbing Mount Kilimanjaro was a life-changing experience. But when I look back, I don't see a mountain. I see these guys. I remember the warmth of patience, the help of Lawrence, the support and strength of Mohammed, Mick and his laugh, his humor, Juma and his smile and service. I'm a better man today, not because I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. I'm a better man today because I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro with them. As a result of spending my time in Africa with these people, I laugh more freely. I smile more openly. I appreciate the things that I have to a much deeper level. And I'm more open and anxious to meet new people. Not because I climbed a mountain, but because I climbed a mountain with them. You've set some big mountains before you. Quite simply, your mountain is going to change the world. But as you go about achieving that goal, it's my hope that not only can you do something extraordinary, but that you can have an extraordinary experience. A lot of things are going to happen as you go about fulfilling your mission. It's what you do with those things that happen. that will make the biggest difference. You can change the world, but just as important on your journey, allow that journey to change you as well. And so I think back, we're now back here, we're back in Columbus, Ohio, finally having summited Mount Kilimanjaro. The mission here today, our purpose here today is simple. Grow our clubs, serve our communities, save 60,000 lives a year. It's a very simple mountain. The purpose is simple, to change the world. And along the way, in order for us to do that, we need to connect with our personal purpose. We need to be willing to face our failures. We need to take the time to fill our buckets, to mitigate our limitations and play to our strengths. We need to find our mantra, that thing that's going to motivate us in those most difficult times. And just as important, we need to have an extraordinary experience as we do and accomplish something extraordinary. And so I think back to those many years ago when I was sitting in that coffee shop. My life-changing journey started with a sip of coffee in a coffee shop in Laguna Beach, California. We're here in Columbus, Ohio. We've got the coffee. We've got the mountain. And we've got the purpose. The question is, do we have the desire? Are you ready to stand up and change the world? That's my question for you here today. Do you have the desire? Thank you very much.